In a quiet, peaceful town on the outskirts of a bustling city, the air was calm, almost too still, as the early afternoon sun filtered through the trees. The sound of leaves rustling was interrupted only by the occasional car passing by on the road that wound through the town. It was the kind of place where time seemed to slow down, where everyone knew everyone, and life moved at a slower pace. Mark, a veteran who had recently returned from a long and grueling military deployment, walked along the winding road. His shoulders were heavy with exhaustion, both physical and mental. He had fought battles far from home, but the hardest one was the one waiting for him here, in the silence of his own mind. Since his return, everything had felt off. The people, the town, the life he used to know, all seemed distant, almost foreign. He had lost touch with himself, his purpose, and now, after months of struggling to find his way, he was simply walking to clear his head, unsure of where he was even going. As Mark walked down the quiet road, a large, elegant mansion appeared ahead. It stood alone, surrounded by perfect gardens, rich and mysterious, completely different from the simple town around it. The tall gates and stone walls gave it an almost secret feel, like it didn't belong in the real world. When Mark reached the iron gate, he paused. It looked like the kind of place he wasn't supposed to enter, but he needed directions. He slowly pushed the gate open, the metal groaning under his hand. The scent of flowers filled the air as he stepped onto the property. Everything was so perfect, it made him feel out of place. Just as he reached the front door, it opened on its own. An older man in a sharp black suit stood there. His name was Thomas, the butler. He looked calm, professional, and somehow too polished for such a quiet town. "Good afternoon, sir. How may I assist you?" he asked. Mark, feeling awkward, said, "Sorry to bother you, I'm trying to find the main road." Thomas nodded, his eyes scanning Mark closely. "It's just beyond the hill," he said softly. "But, it seems you've come quite a long way." Mark paused, sensing something deeper behind those words. Mark shifted uneasily under the butler's intense gaze. His mind raced, trying to understand why the man's eyes lingered on him with such intensity. The conversation seemed to have shifted subtly, like a door opening to a room Mark wasn't ready to enter. The butler, Thomas, took a step closer, his presence almost overwhelming in its quiet authority. "The directions to the main road are indeed simple, but it seems there's more to your journey than you realize, Mr. Anderson," he said softly. Mark's brow furrowed in confusion. "How do you know my name?" Thomas's lips curved slightly, though there was no warmth in the gesture. "I know more about you than you think," he replied. His voice was low, measured, like each word was carefully chosen. "I've been watching you for some time now, Mr. Anderson, ever since you returned from your last deployment." Mark's heart skipped a beat. "Watching me?" he echoed, disbelief creeping into his voice. "What do you mean? I don't know you." Thomas nodded, as if expecting this reaction. "I understand your surprise. It's not every day that someone finds themselves under the watchful eye of a stranger. But I've seen the toll the years have taken on you. The war, the struggles you've faced since returning home. I've been paying attention." Mark felt his stomach twist into knots. He hadn't spoken to anyone about his struggles, not in detail. He had kept everything buried, his PTSD, the alienation he felt from the world, the loneliness that haunted him every day. To hear a stranger speak so openly about things Mark had only confided in his journal left him unsettled. "Look, I don't know what you think you know, but I'm just trying to get home," Mark said, his voice growing tighter with discomfort. Thomas raised a hand, his palm open in a gesture of calm. "I understand, Mr. Anderson, but the truth is you've been lost for longer than you realize. And the directions to the road you seek are not the only ones you need right now." Mark's throat went dry. He didn't know what to say. This conversation was spiraling into territory that felt dangerous, like something he couldn't control. His instincts screamed at him to leave, but something held him in place, curiosity maybe, or the strange sense of destiny that seemed to echo in Thomas's words. "I don't understand," Mark muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. "How could you know all of that about me?" Thomas stepped back and gestured to the door behind him. "Come inside for a moment, Mr. Anderson. There's something important we need to discuss." It's about your past, your father. Mark froze, the mention of his father sending a sharp pang through his chest. His father had died when Mark was just a boy. It was one of the few things he didn't like to think about. The memory of a man who had been a stranger to him. The man who had left him behind. I don't want to be rude, but I'm really not interested in. Mark began, but Thomas interrupted him with a knowing look. Please, Thomas said, his voice no longer just polite, but urging. It won't take long. There's something you need to hear, something that could change everything for you. It's about your inheritance. Mark's pulse quickened. Inheritance. His mind raced, but he couldn't piece it together. He had no family left. The thought of an inheritance felt absurd. But something about Thomas's words, something in the way he spoke, made Mark feel like there was more to this strange encounter than coincidence. Hesitantly, Mark took a step forward, driven by the pull of unanswered questions. Okay, he said, his voice still tinged with doubt. I'll listen. Thomas stepped aside, allowing Mark to enter the mansion. As Mark crossed the threshold, the door closed quietly behind him, and for the first time since his return, he felt like he was stepping into a world that didn't belong to him. It felt both inviting and overwhelming. He had no idea what he was about to learn, but deep down, he knew that this conversation would change everything. Mark stepped into the mansion, the quiet click of the door behind him, echoing through the halls. He stood for a moment, taking in the lavish surroundings. The mansion's interior was nothing like he'd ever imagined. It was an intricate blend of old-world charm and modern luxury, dark wood paneling on the walls, ornate chandeliers that hung from the high ceilings, and antique furniture that gleamed with the care it had been given over the years. Every inch of the space seemed to be carefully curated, as if it was not meant for anyone to touch, not meant for someone like Mark. He felt out of place, like a soldier walking into a world he had never belonged to. The weight of his boots on the polished floors seemed too heavy, and the silence in the house was suffocating. The air smelled faintly of rich wood, dust and something else, a sense of history, of old secrets buried beneath the layers of luxury. Portraits of stern-faced people lined the walls, their eyes following Mark as he was led deeper into the mansion by Thomas. The butler moved with a grace that seemed unnatural, as if he had lived his entire life in these halls. Mark trailed behind him, trying to make sense of everything, but nothing about this situation made sense. They finally stopped in front of a large sitting room. The walls were covered with bookshelves, and more portraits, this time of a man Mark didn't recognize. The man in the portrait looked strikingly similar to Mark, his features sharp and handsome, though the eyes seemed colder, harder. The man wore an expression of authority, a kind of quiet confidence that Mark couldn't help but notice. Thomas turned to him, his face calm and collected. Please, have a seat, he said, gesturing to an armchair by the fire. Mark sat down warily, his mind racing with questions. As Thomas took a seat across from him, he began to speak in a soft, almost soothing voice. Your father, Mr. Anderson, was a man of great importance. He built this mansion, this estate, with his own hands. He was a businessman of extraordinary wealth and influence. Mark's stomach twisted. My father, he echoed, unable to keep the disbelief from his voice. He had always known his father had died when he was young, leaving him with only distant memories, and a few faded photographs. Mark had grown up without a father figure, raised by his mother, who had always struggled to make ends meet. The idea of his father being wealthy, a man of such power, was something Mark had never even considered. Thomas nodded, his eyes locking with Mark's. Yes, he was a wealthy man, but he never shared that life with you. For reasons I'm sure you'll understand, he kept it hidden from you. But he never stopped watching over you, even after he was gone. He made sure you were safe, that you had the chance to become the man you are today. Mark blinked, his mind spinning. What are you talking about? He demanded, the confusion turning into a rising sense of panic. My father, he's been dead for years. I never knew any of this. How could he have been watching me? Thomas sat back, folding his hands in his lap. Your father left everything to you, Mr. Anderson. This mansion, the estate, everything he built, it is yours. It's all in his will. When you returned from your last deployment, he knew it was time for you to take your place here. This is your legacy. It always was, even if you didn't know it. Mark's heart pounded in his chest, a flood of emotions crashing over him. He couldn't breathe, couldn't wrap his head around the words Thomas was saying. His father, a wealthy businessman. A man who owned this mansion. The very idea felt foreign, like a different life Mark wasn't meant to have. That's impossible, Mark muttered under his breath. I don't even know who my father was. I don't know anything about this world. I'm just a soldier, a man who's lost everything. Thomas's gaze softened. You're more than that, Mr. Anderson. Your father saw something in you. He believed you had the strength to take on this responsibility. And now, it's time for you to fulfill that belief. To take charge of this place, to rebuild your life in a way your father always hoped you would. Mark stood up abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. His heart raced, his mind reeling. He wasn't ready for this. He had never asked for this. He was just a soldier who had fought in wars, who had seen things that no one should have to see. He had returned home to heal, to find peace, not to suddenly be thrust into the life of a wealthy heir. I don't know how to do this, Mark said, his voice tight with frustration. I don't even know who I am anymore. I was just trying to find my way home. Thomas rose slowly, walking toward a large window that overlooked the gardens. You've been home for a long time, Mr. Anderson. You just haven't realized it yet. Mark clenched his fists, the internal struggle intensifying. His emotions were a tangled mess: confusion, anger, disbelief. How could this man ask him to step into a life he knew nothing about? To embrace a legacy he had never wanted? And yet, as Thomas's words hung in the air, Mark felt an inexplicable pull. There was something about this mansion, about the idea of honoring his father's memory, that called to him. Deep down, he knew he couldn't ignore it. He ran a hand through his hair, trying to steady his breathing. So, what do I do now? Thomas turned, his expression unreadable but calm. You take charge, Mr. Anderson. You honor your father's legacy. You rebuild, not just this mansion, but your life. Mark didn't know what he wanted anymore. But something in Thomas's eyes told him that this was his moment, his chance to change everything. It was a chance to step into a world he never asked for, but maybe, just maybe, one he was meant to be a part of. Mark stood by the large window, staring out at the lush gardens below. His mind was a whirlwind, torn between two worlds, one of quiet simplicity and the other of wealth and legacy. He had spent years fighting battles, both on the field and within himself, only to return to a life that felt disconnected from everything he had known. Now, this mansion, this legacy his father had left for him, felt like another battle he wasn't prepared to fight. The weight of Thomas's words pressed on him. He had never wanted anything more than peace, a place to belong. Yet here he was, on the cusp of inheriting something so grand, so distant from the life he'd built for himself after his military service. The mansion, with all its wealth and history, represented everything he had fought against: luxury, power, and a world he had never been a part of. It seemed like an unreachable dream, one that didn't belong to a soldier who had spent his years on the front lines, not in grand ballrooms or boardrooms. But the thought of turning away from it, it felt wrong. He had spent so much time feeling lost, disconnected from his past, from his father's legacy. Maybe this was his chance, not just to reclaim what he had lost, but to heal from the scars that ran deeper than the visible ones. Perhaps this wasn't just an inheritance of wealth, but of something more: family, history, and an opportunity to rebuild. Mark closed his eyes, the weight of the decision heavy on his chest. Could he do this? Could he step into a world he knew nothing about, and take on a responsibility he hadn't asked for? In the end, there was something undeniable within him, a spark of curiosity, a pull toward the unknown. He couldn't ignore the chance to reconnect with a family he had never truly known, to honor a father who, despite everything, had watched over him. Taking a deep breath, Mark turned back to Thomas. I'll do it. I'll take up the mantle my father left for me. Thomas's face softened, and for the first time, there was warmth in his eyes. You've made the right choice, Mr. Anderson. Your father would be proud. Mark wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in a long while, he felt like he was standing at the beginning of something new, something that maybe was worth fighting for. As Mark stepped out of the mansion, the weight of his decision settled into his chest, but this time, it wasn't the burden of uncertainty, it was the quiet relief of acceptance. The garden stretched out before him, bathed in the soft glow of the setting sun. He didn't have all the answers, and he didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was heading in the right direction. The road ahead was still uncertain, but it was his to walk. The memories of the past, of war, of loss, didn't vanish, but they no longer defined him. He was no longer just a soldier returning home, he was someone with a new purpose, someone who had been given the chance to shape his own legacy. From the doorway of the mansion, Thomas watched him quietly. His expression remained unreadable, but a small knowing smile tugged at the corners of his lips. He had seen this moment coming. Mark had come to the mansion seeking directions. What he left with was something far greater, a chance at a new life, a new beginning, and a legacy he never knew he had. As Mark stepped away from the mansion, leaving behind the past he had fought so hard to understand, he realized that life sometimes brings us unexpected paths that can change everything we thought we knew about ourselves. His journey had begun with a simple question for directions, but it led him to the discovery of a legacy, a family he never knew, and a future full of possibilities. It's a reminder that sometimes, the most unexpected twists can lead us to the most meaningful chapters of our lives. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more emotional journeys and inspiring tales. And remember, you never know what life has in store. Your next step could change everything.